Dementia Researcher with a blog and a rating.
I want to talk about something that is all too often a mystery to many of us. We know it happens across many workplaces. It may have happened to someone you know. For some, it is thrust upon them. Others may be chasing after it and never quite grasping it. Yes, I'm talking about academic promotions. This year, I was successful in being promoted from Research Associate to Senior Associate at Newcastle University. I'll hold graciously for applause after attempting last year and being unsuccessful, but we don't have to dwell on that too much. So I'm writing about why and how I applied, found the process, and ultimately what made the difference between the two applications, only a year apart from each other. Hopefully my experience will help some of you thinking about going through the process yourselves. In this first blog, I'll discuss my first attempt, the process, and dealing with an unsuccessful run. Why I applied, and when I did. This is something I didn't expect to write about until I sat down and started writing. Looking around, I could see colleagues with more experience than me who had not yet transitioned to SRAs, and some people in the job less time who had. I knew there was an SRA, a Senior Research Associate position, but I didn't really think about how or why you got there. I didn't really start thinking about it until 2022, after the COVID-19 pandemic settled down. A colleague around the same experience had decided to apply for an SRA position within his existing group, applying as if he were an external candidate, and he got the job deservedly. Although I was happy for him, the competitive cogs in the back of my head started to slowly wear into action. It was also around this time that the cost of living was really beginning to bite. And although we might not like to admit it as noble scientists, the prospect of a pay bump was looking appealing. Putting feelers out to other colleagues, I was flattered by their responses. Go for it, they said. I'm surprised you haven't already. You'll walk it. Although I maybe should have taken it with a pinch of salt. My line manager ultimately agreed to support me in my application, but was a little more sober about it. The promotion application and process. Of course, I can only speak for the promotion process at Newcastle. For us, there is one promotion round a year. You put in a relatively hefty application in November. It is signed off by the Institute Dean and sent to a faculty committee to decide the following March, April. There is no interview process, for good or bad, and if successful, you're officially promoted in the following August. So it's quite a lengthy process, start to end, with everything riding on your application. So let's go through what the SR application asks for at Newcastle. Firstly, you're required to tick one of the following. Whether you're wholly exceptional in your performance in research and innovation, wholly exceptional performance in teaching and scholarship, excellent performance in both research and teaching, as well as being underpinned by engagement, management and leadership. Part 2 requires your personal statement. Part 3 is a CV, with education, positions, memberships, esteem indicators, teaching and scholarship, research outputs, a screenshot of your Google Scholar H index, your research contribution, funding awards and postgraduate supervision, engagement and knowledge exchange achievements, management and leadership. Right off the bat, I found it daunting being asked if my performance was wholly exceptional. Immediately, I felt thrown off guard. My thoughts something like, wholly exceptional? I think I'm good at my job. Probably better than some, but not as good as others. I may have had points of being wholly exceptional for brief periods. The expectation of being wholly exceptional at work is woefully unrealistic and open to huge amounts of interpretation. The imposter syndrome had already set in before we'd even started. Some of these requirements are standard job application stuff, but some can be tricky and open to interpretation. For example, I'd never heard the phrase esteem indicator before, and I felt almost exposed by having my H-index printed in the application. Ranking my contribution to papers in percentage terms felt very uncomfortable at the time. I will say I made one of my first big mistakes right off the bat as well. I spent far too long ruminating over the application, giving it far too much attention, so that it evolved from something I was taking a long shot at to the point where I'd invested a lot into it, which will have consequences later. Fast forwarding slightly, I completed my application and went to meet my institute dean to discuss supporting it. Although she was happy to support me if I wished, she advised me that she wasn't sure I was quite independent enough to be sure of a promotion, and it could go 50-50. Although in the meeting I tried to be composed and professional, I'm not ashamed to say I felt a little emotional on the way home. I was totally taken by surprise how much it suddenly meant to me, like much of my value in work was at stake. March came around, and unfortunately I got the news that my application was unsuccessful. Of course I was disappointed, but I'm not embarrassed to say I took it a little bit harder when I heard a few of my friends were successful. Like I mentioned, I don't want to dwell too much on the negative, but I will mention a few things I've thought about in this period of hindsight. I think we take for granted sometimes how much committing to an academic career demands of us. From the minute we commit to those master's or PhD courses, you're all in. Your mind is stuck in a zero-sum game. We're maybe just hardwired to give a little too much of ourselves. That can come back to bite us. Secondly, it's a bit cliché, but in some ways the knockback was a healthy thing. It did take a bit of the sheen off academia. I can sometimes feel like it's outside of regular jobs, but it was a big reminder that in the end we were employees in a workplace. It was really the first time I started to ask myself, am I valued? Am I happy with my salary? Would it be different in another setting? The things most people in careers ask themselves daily. At the time it felt bleak, like a defeat, but it's probably a healthier relationship to have with research as a job. So after a few tears, a few more packaged biscuits, and even more drinks later, I began to take stock. In reality, what my dean had told me was true. It was a close call, and my feedback was that I was close, but my application had faults. I wasn't confident enough in identifying my unique selling point, and if the funding for my fellowship had been processed by finance a few weeks earlier, my income generation would have looked better. Most importantly, I had learned some things about myself at work. I was confident enough to realise I didn't feel I was being paid my worth, which in turn made me more open to the idea that if it wasn't going to change at Newcastle, I was open to other opportunities. Not that I wanted to leave, but there was a sense of freedom in being open to more possibilities. I set myself a goal that in the next year I would give it one more go, really focus my CV for the next round. And if that was unsuccessful, and I was unhappy, I would begin to look for new opportunities. Rejection made me more open about discussing pay and progression with my managers. It led them to support me being awarded a pay increase and a bonus. Not the same as a new pay band, but the recognition went a long way. Another example of Geordie wisdom, shy bands getting out. So although I didn't get what I wanted, I came out with a net benefit. In my next blog, I'll talk about dusting yourself off for round 2, and what changes pushed the second application over the line.
Thank you for listening. Join the Dementia Research bloggers and share your own views.